can kind of think of like a GitHub for anything, maybe GitHub for any kind of a content, and a lot of our infrastructure is based on Git, but in a decentralized way, so that when you go out and you say fork a piece of content or a piece of code, there's a whole history of how that all evolved. So I think for scientific research, I think that's going to be really exciting and interesting to have data sets out there. I think it's going to really improve the shareability of content, because at the end of the day, with this full history, people can get rewarded for all the things that they contribute.
Hi, it's Conor Svensson here, founder and CEO at Web3 Labs. This is a conversation I had with Leonard Kish, co-founder of the Cortex Network. Cortex is a Web3 content network that provides a scalable, provable, private, user-centric and affordable network for publishing, finding and updating content. In our conversation, we unpacked the various components to the Cortex network, why hierarchical deterministic wallets or HD wallets are a key building block for them, and how the initial batch of creators are going to be engaging with the network. The current centralized models for publishing content online are far from ideal, and it was great to hear Leo's perspectives on how Cortex is challenging this approach. Hey Leo, it's great to have you here on the podcast today.
Hey, thanks, Connor. Great to be here.
So I love always starting these conversations by hearing about people's own individual journeys with Web3. And I'd love to hear, first of all, what was it that got you interested in the technology, and what was your journey going from being aware of it into it becoming an all-consuming focus?
My background actually is kind of pretty different. I started in neuroscience, actually, and I was doing Parkinson's disease research and doing lots of experiments with how the brain changes with or without different neurotransmitters. So I think I've always had a biological approach, but also kind of a network-based approach into doing things. And as part of that research, I was collecting huge data samples and didn't really know how to analyze them very well. This back in like late 90s, and started to learn a little bit more about databases. Ultimately went back and got a master's in information systems and worked in software and what you'd probably call user experience design now. And wound up then, kind of a natural migration into digital health, and I'd got a lot of interest in through some writing I had done, kind of combining kind of the human machine interface and user experience and what it meant for digital health, and that got me a lot of attention from a lot of key people in the industry. And one of the things that came about through all of that was the problem with the healthcare, with digital health in general, is that people's information doesn't follow them around where they are, right? Your data's distributed not in the right way through a lot of different institutions. It's probably better in the UK than it is here, but here it's very much viewed as a corporate asset. There's not much interest in really providing the framework for it to be shared, so that it's available when a patient gets seen. So when Bitcoin, in 2014, I started hearing more and more about that, and the idea of a distributed system made sense to me on a lot of different levels. In some ways, proof of work had this kind of thermodynamics element to it, almost like a biological element to it. It just made a lot of sense. And then, the basic concept was, if somebody can have a bank account through a distributed network without a bank, why couldn't they have a database for their own information that really just belonged to them as part of a distributed network? And so that's really what got me into, first Bitcoin and then Ethereum, and trying to figure out and crack this case for how to really create a responsive digital infrastructure that's distributed but works in much the same way that we're used to databases uh, working today.
And so, what did those earlier iterations, in terms of when you were, I guess, going deeper with the technology, sort of spit out? Where did you kind of get to? Because I know we'll come on, of course, to the Cortex shortly, but in those kind of earlier stages, what were some of the things that you did, and or perhaps some of the tools and technologies you played around with, perhaps on top of Bitcoin, Ethereum, or other Web3 platforms?
The core, and in many ways, much the core of what Cortex Network is today, really started with this idea of an HD, or hierarchical deterministic wallet, which is a mouthful, but what it really means is, normally with Bitcoin or Ethereum, you have a public-private key pair that's kind of your, how you access your account. I think I'll just mention that one of the things that people underappreciate in blockchain technologies in general is just how powerful that is, because what it means is that your relationship to that account and the relationship of the public key and the private key is really determined by math, as opposed to having a password, a username and password in a database somewhere that's controlled by an external entity. So I think first and foremost, that kind of independence that the public-private key infrastructure gives you is a big part of the decentralization and the what people are calling self-sovereignty of Bitcoin and blockchain technologies in general. The HD wallet then is a it is a hierarchical wallet, meaning that the kind of the top key creates a hierarchy underneath it, whereby you can kind of have access to all the keys in the wallet, and know that they're related, but to somebody on the outside, all those keys look just completely random. So the basic idea is, well, what if we built a data structure out of the way that those keys are derived?
And so with the HD wallets, they enable you to, I guess, arbitrarily create new wallets, and so where they're all derived from this kind of root key, or wallet, so to speak. And were you thinking in terms of, you have specific wallets for specific use cases, as in order to kind of
Yeah, the
segment?
basic idea was, going back to the healthcare use case was, and one of the, still a big problem that I think we'll come back to eventually, is that, when you share your health information, it's kind of all or nothing. You need to share your entire record or the entire information about a visit. It's very hard to verifiably and reliably share just maybe a piece of it. But I think there are a lot of use cases in healthcare where you might want to just verifiably share maybe just the medications that you're taking. So you want to, see that a physician has signed that those, that you're actually been prescribed these medications, and you might want to have a verifiable history of, when you've taken them. But you can't share just that piece. So what the HD wallet infrastructure allows you to do then is, at any kind of point in that infrastructure, you could share that key and all the information underneath it without sharing all the rest of it. So that was kind of the basic idea, is if we can build data infrastructure around this, then it gives people that kind of granularity to share information verifiably without sharing all their information.
And so from there, I presume that the applicability of what you're working on kind of expanded somewhat to be not just about medical records and that side of it, to a
Yeah,
more general purpose kind of platform.
yeah. I think the the main issue with a lot of healthcare information is that it's right now controlled by someone else, and I think um, you know a lot of Bitcoin or blockchain technologies really seem to have to come from the ground up, because they are about ultimately individual sovereignty and ability for individuals to kind of can take control of their infrastructure and their digital abilities on their own. So I think what we realize is a lot of this is going to have to come from the grassroots, and that's either working with smaller digital health companies, and we also realize that this basic technology for kind of self-sovereign data, is applicable just about everywhere. It's something that I think when now, back then we didn't really have a word for Web3 or what people are talking about now, which is, to me, a user-owned web, the self-sovereign web. Didn't really have a name for it, and that's what I think Web3 has become now. And it's, we're still very early. It's said a lot, but it's true that because there isn't really a data infrastructure to support Web3 right now. And that's what I think Cortex is becoming. I think we've solved a lot of the major problems in making content and data scalable for kind of everyday use cases. So the implications are much bigger than just healthcare, but those basic use cases I think are going to be really interesting around sharing just individual elements of what you want to, and without the whole record. I think it's going to be really interesting.
So just to delve a little bit deeper on the data sharing aspect of it, does it cross over with the verified credentials and decentralized identity kind of movements there? Because, as you say, this the data aspects of Web3 are a very crucial part of it, and there are certain movements there as well with these decentralized identifiers, where you have these self-sovereign identities and this idea of credentials that can be issued by organizations. Users could have those within a wallet that someone can then verify against that. And does the approach you're taking kind of cross over?
I'd say it supports all of those kinds of things, yeah, but it's very flexible in that, you can have, say, an element of this wallet with an identity or with some sort of credential, and you could have it signed by that authorization group, whatever it is, that verifier. So yeah, this basic architecture certainly supports all those kinds of use cases. And the way we're using it, much of the identity parts for us, it can be done in a few different ways, but the way we're kind of centering things for now, although again it can be flexible because there's kind of a NFT domain part of this, and then there's kind of underlying data infrastructure, and you can kind of put identities in both, because at the end of the day both are immutable and signed. So within our infrastructure there's a lot of different ways you can do those kinds of things. So the idea is to kind of build something that's flexible for a wide variety of use cases.
And let's start to unpack some of those details, just so that people can really appreciate the differences of what you're doing here versus what there is right now. I think there's kind of two angles to it. One is that there's the kind of the status quo, the Web 2 ways of doing these things, i.e. you have these content providers, or you have sites like Medium, for instance, where people can create content. You have identities that are very much so, as you mentioned earlier on, kind of controlled by specific organizations where they see that data as a commodity. And then you've got some of these Web3 technologies that have been around for a little while now. The HD wallets, of course, you mentioned earlier, but some of the other networks out there, like the Ethereum providing this computational layer, IPFS as well, providing like a decentralized storage network. There are still usability and scalability challenges which are being addressed by other companies with this. But when if we unpack Cortex specifically in this landscape, so how, for the end user, how does it provide a more seamless Web3 experience?
That's one thing that we're really proud of, is that we've been able to create something that just about anybody without any special crypto or developer or coding skills can start publishing their own web pages in a matter of minutes. So we've actually launched some of that a couple of weeks ago at ETH Barcelona, and we've been recruiting artists that don't have a lot of crypto special skills. Maybe they know how to use MetaMask, but beyond that, no special skills required to start publishing in this kind of environment. A lot of that comes down to some pretty creative stuff Josh Robinson, our CTO, has developed in terms of collecting these NFT domains. And so it starts with, the same way in Web 2 or Web 1, it starts with a domain name, your .com or your .io or whatever it is, to, your kind of web real estate. And so in crypto or in Web 3, these are NFT. Well, they're not all NFTs, but in our case, they're full NFT domains, non-fungible token domains. So what that means is that you can own them for life. They're endlessly. You can mint subdomains that are also NFTs that are kind of tradable assets. And for the way we're doing it, you can actually get these in 2 clicks. We're giving away free at hmn.domains. And we have a few others that we'll be releasing as well, some for enterprise specific use cases, one for that'll be for creating digital twins for buildings, for example. But yeah, a lot of the basic idea with the Butterfly protocol, which is the domains that we're using, is these can be kind of custom built for different things. But it all starts with getting your domain. So if I have a .hmn domain, I might get like leo.hmn and start building my Web3 pages and identity there.
So what does the H&M stand for in that context?
Human.
And so the way in which, and I think this is quite an important thing to unpack there as well, in terms of the user experience side of things, you're pushing people to claim these domains as like a starting point, because it stops them having to deal with the hexadecimal side of this world, which is quite endemic right now within a lot of Web3 protocols. Mm-hmm. And so you're really trying to force them to go about it in the more, well, from a user experience perspective, really how we think this stuff should be done going forward.
Yeah, I mean, human readable. I mean, I remember back in the late 90s, people trying to, first getting their hands around .com, things that seem kind of second nature now. But yeah, the hexadecimal addresses, are another, just one of those small kind of user experience things that it's hard for people to get over. It seems confusing. And so having human readable, it's also kind of a geeky term, but human readable meaning, you can actually, have something with meaning that's also a crypto address, and can do the same kinds of things. The key, you're still managing your private keys on the back end, but you can start using these things that are, just a little more meaningful to us humans.
Yeah, and certainly on that, it's one of those areas that I feel quite passionate about. That it should only be programmers and engineers who ever need to think in terms of hexadecimal. That shouldn't bubble up to the surface for everyday people at all.
Right. I mean, crypto's been a little slower than usual, I think, because of the security aspects, and I think there's always an interplay between how secure something is and how much of that those details you kind of gloss over. So it's been a little bit slower, and it's partially because we started with maybe the hardest problem, I think, in crypto, which is and the highest risk problem in crypto, which is digital cash. But that's so the security has always kind of come first in crypto, and user experience second. And I think now the technologies are maturing enough that we can start to build things that are way more user experience friendly.
So you've got the .hnm domains when people actually kind of sign up to the network, but then there's also you have kind of publishing mechanics as well, right? In terms of when people actually release content on the network, and so if you're able to talk people through that and the approach.
Yeah. So what's kind of been missing is, you can get your ENS domain, your .eth domain, and you can go to IPFS and you can create a web page, and you can then take the CID for that page and put it on your, your .eth site, and you can create a Web3 site and presence that's also a crypto address. What we've done is make that first seamless. You don't need to deal with IPFS at all, but it's still a distributed data backend. What we've been able to do is connect that kind of those middle pieces through really three parts of or three kind of components that are, I think, pretty. Once people know about them, should become, I think, pretty well known. I think they're. It's hard for me to say from the inside, but I think they'll be seen as pretty big crypto innovations in their own right, that connects kind of the front end domains to the IPFS backend in a way that's scalable and easy for people to use. So in the first instances with these HMN domains, we'll have a site where people can just open up their wallet, with MetaMask initially, using their, and be able to publish to their HMN domain with a very, like, what you see is what you get kind of interface, almost like, what's a good example?
Kind of like with Medium or something like that.
Yeah, with Medium, but it's more of a site publishing tool. So maybe a little more like Squarespace or something like that. A very simple Squarespace, or WordPress or something like that. But a very simplified version where people can just go create a web page and hit the publish button and have it published and have a website in Web3 in a full, so it's maybe not appreciated, but in a fully decentralized environment. So the individuals literally own the domain name, the HMN domain, which is an NFT, and because it's their keys, they control the data on the back end on IPFS, and we are creating a very simple interface where people can just publish to that environment. And part of that goes to the HD wallets that I mentioned before, but the two other big innovations on top of that, the HD wallets now we're calling HD data. The fancy kind of term for that is a state management system that ties the content state to the domain address. So if you look at the kind of the content state, what is the, when you put a document into IPFS, you get a hash back. So that hash is essentially what we're calling the state. So a way to tie that state to the domains on the front end. And we're doing that with these HD wallets and keys. But there's a namespace built around that. So it's not just looking at the keys in the HD wallet. It's very much like a file system you would see, on your desktop or in a website after the .com. There's a slash, and then, there's the directory structure essentially. So it looks very much like that. So we've essentially built a directory structure with these keys. So all the way down throughout the whole URL, those are valid crypto addresses at each page. So each page kind of combines identity, the content, and a crypto account all in the same piece. So I think there's some really interesting use cases that will evolve from that I think we can't even predict. But in some ways I see it as the whole web then becoming kind of a social network, because as well as an economy, because every bit of content that ultimately you'll be able to publish there, you will also be able to send and receive tokens, but is also tied to an identity. So there's a social network component of everything that's going to be built into it. And I think that's pretty powerful.
And so one of the things, I guess, to touch on, which I'm sure people there have spoken about a lot too, is with these root HD keys, which everything's derived from. What happens in the event of those being compromised? Because there's kind of a trickle down effect, right? If someone was able to get hold of the private key at that root address.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things with crypto that is one of the biggest hurdles to overcome. But there are plenty of solutions to that. So you can have ways that you can have your keys managed by, say, your group of friends, so that if you lose your keys, you can go to your 3 friends and they can sign to essentially recover those keys. So there's a lot of different ways to, and there's with most enterprise wallets, there's multi-signatures. So if any one key got compromised, it wouldn't be able to be used to flesh out the whole structure. So most of these solutions are going to be based on requiring more than one key, but a lot of the keys are going to be managed in the the way that private keys are managed today, with your Apple, uh, private areas within the operating systems that you use. Most people won't have to deal with that, but we're never going to require, for instance, somebody to input their passphrase, and I don't think, as a rule, that's probably how all crypto should operate. We don't really want to get into allowing people to. Those are a big weakness. So I think as much as we can avoid that, we should.
Yeah, people definitely shouldn't have to deal with usernames and passwords, especially these days. And hopefully, we'll see the end of them at some point soon. There's certainly a lot of companies building that way, which is refreshing to see. So let's talk as well about the kind of token economic side of this as well, because one of the things in Web3 that is a very key component of it is the token aspect, in terms of whether that's shared ownership in terms of protocols, or also the potential for other types of remuneration which content providers can get, or artists, for actually creating things. We've seen it with NFTs around resales, where you have like in effect a revenue share of any resales can go back to the original creator.
Mm-hmm.
In the sort of secondary sales, and that is, and likewise as well with content being published too. You have approaches like, say, the Mirror protocol, for instance, where people can publish content on there and they can purchase NFTs of it. Now, I know that with the Cortex network, you have these whole incentives there. So if we perhaps break down some of those incentives too, because of course what the upside for people working with these sorts of Web3 native stacks, it's not just about the self-sovereign aspect of it, the kind of them being in more control. There's also the upside.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, each piece of content will essentially have so it has a URL, but that URL is also a crypto address. So you'll be able to send and receive tokens, or if you say publish a blog post or a song or a video, inherent in that will be a valid crypto address where people can send you tokens, and we'll also have token gating, so that if you publish a new song, you have to have, if you've released an NFT, to your followers, Logic on crypto Twitter, LOGIK is one example. He's doing some really innovative things around NFTs and live events. And so you'll be able to, so he's, I think, maybe has a few thousand tokens that he's given out to his kind of community. And those tokens can then be used for a lot of things, to give you access into real world events, but also into online content. So we'll have the same thing. So if you publish to a site, or within Cortex or within the HTML domains, you can gate that for different tokens. So if you've issued tokens to your followers, you can release tokens just to them. So that's kind of almost like a subscription that people have, right? That you can, and there's a lot of different ways you can do the tokens for different months or different years or different certain amounts of time for that you can keep them valid. So I think that's what a lot of the subscriptions will look like going forward. But a lot of cool ways to gate access both to real live events as well as online events and online content. But then also ways to get paid, because if people like the content, they can, the content is an address that they can send and receive tokens or different kinds of value.
And so with that, do you, at this point in time, are there specific, I guess, classes of creators who you're finding that it's kind of resonating most with the platform? Because I know, of course, long term, right, it's very broad in terms of the potential user base for this. But in these earlier stages, no doubt there's specific niches and so on that you're going after.
Yeah, we're working with artists. So, and I think artists and musicians in general are finding this really attractive because a lot of the art, if you look at the NFT art out there, it's still driven by centralized platforms like OpenSea, for example. So a lot of artists are looking for ways to, really embrace Web3 at a deeper level. So creating Web3 decentralized marketplaces where they can, or setting up their own gallery where they literally own the NFTs and the site itself and everything in between, as well as the domain, and so they can really brand everything in a meaningful way. I should mention too that the domains that we're using, these NFT domains, are full NFTs, which is a little bit different, which means that you can do things with them that normal NFTs do. Most of the other domains out there, you just they're essentially a pointer to the site itself and don't allow you to do too much. With these full NFT butterfly domains, you can do all the same things that a normal NFT does. So you can update the metadata, you can put in an image and tie an image to the domain itself. So you can imagine, like, if you're created new, whatever the next ape series is, or what have you, you could have, say, a .ape domain, and have, I could have, Dave.ape is one of the new apes that's created in that series, and underneath Dave.ape, Dave can mint, one.dave.ape, like a whole series of NFT subdomains that he can then issue as full NFTs. And they can, if those are game characters or something like that, each of those game characters because you can edit the metadata, you can put in like different energy levels. Seen some NFTs do that. The longer you hold the NFT, the more energy it gains. A lot of different cool innovations in that, so that the game character doesn't just have the NFT, it also has a space and a whole kind of data infrastructure for storytelling or gameplay and things in Web3. So it's another kind of use case that we're opening up that I think is going to be big once people see the power of it.
Yeah, it's certainly one of those areas. Say for instance, even contrasting like the Ethereum name service, and the records there are fixed in size. And then I know, say with the Solana name service, for instance, they actually enable people to select the size of the records. And no doubt there are these kind of opportunities that many people haven't kind of seen, what they'll actually look like, which can kind of play into this whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard for a lot. We've always said that our success is going to depend on what people build with what we're doing. It's hard to just explain, the capabilities. People actually have to see them, but I think we're just really excited about the power that these individual artists, game developers, musicians are starting to play around with on the back end, and it really is going to be cool. The things that Web3 is going to enable for individual artists. But I will say that the way we look at the market, there's definitely the artist and creator side, but there's also the enterprise side, because I think this kind of infrastructure where you have validation of data, structured data, opens up a lot of use cases for, say, digital twins, where you want to tie, say, the history of a building, kind of maybe the Carfax of a building and everything that's happened to it, to the actual physical building. So I think, in a way, the benefit there is buildings and physical space we're kind of used to. That you can't recreate the coffee cup on your desk. You can create a new one, but it doesn't occupy the same space. So I think when you're dealing with immutable kind of data infrastructures, you're also creating immutable spaces. So those immutable spaces can then better mirror the real world infrastructure in some pretty unique ways. It's kind of a hill I'll die on, but I always say the metaverse is not a new kind of world that we're creating or entering. Meta means, it's ultimately self-referential. It's about the real world that we live in. So to me, the metaverse means, like, how are we documenting and creating a kind of digital twin of the world that we occupy in a much richer data environment that's also immutable.
And so, given that you've mentioned metaverse, are there specific plays, with that? As you mentioned, with digital twins, for instance, there's of course scope for taking something and having it in a a virtual environment of some shape or form. Are you looking into that aspect too, or is it kind of more the granular? Here's a representation of this real world thing on chain, but then it's kind of more down to the people building on top of the platform to see opportunities there to link it with more sophisticated things.
No, I think we are looking deeply at that because the namespace and the keys, the way we've constructed it, the keys now are relational. Normally you get a pair of keys. They're not tied to a name or an address. They just exist independently. Maybe they just exist in the dimension of time on the blockchain, right? Things get signed. It has this, particular sequence or an order. But within the namespace and with the keys kind of having this relational structure to them, it becomes much more apparent how to model, physical space with this kind of crypto space, where kind of each point in space has a key pair associated with it. So yeah, it's something we're looking really deeply at.
And so one of the other things I noticed is that the actual Cortex network has launched on top of Polygon, but the system, you're trying to remain chain agnostic there. But if you maybe talk us through some of those sides in terms of how the blockchain piece fits into it behind the scenes.
Yeah, so I've mentioned the HD name, which is the key creation in the namespace, and HD data, which is the state management system that ties that namespace to the backend and IPFS. The part we haven't talked about yet is HD index, which is the scalability solution for what we're building. HD index is a very efficient data structure that provides verifiable key value lookups and sequential lookups to IPFS. So what essentially that means for scalability is that you can store something on IPFS and, say it's a content update, and it can be an update from the state before, maybe, you're just updating a document to a new version. So the sequential lookup allows you to relate those two things and find them very fast that they're related, even though, the state is, it's a hash, so it's a completely different number or whatever. But it still allows you to quickly find those. And it also allows you to then take all those content updates and batch them. It's if your audience is familiar with different trees, it's essentially a combination of a sparse Merkle tree and a binary search tree. What that allows you to do then is bundle, potentially thousands of commits into a single hash that then get the way that the network is going to work and how the tokens will work on Polygon is that then all those commits you can either publish yourself as a self-publisher, or you can send to a publisher. And publishers in our network are very much like miners in a proof-of-stake system. They validate the transactions, they pull in the commits, and then they publish those commits of that local state of that hash on chain, and just that hash is all that gets published on chain. All the other kind of heavy lifting happens off chain or on IPFS. And so the way it'll work is it'll be a proof of stake system where the publishers stake a certain amount to publish. Say if you want to build the next Twitter, you'd publish a large amount. If you're only going to publish a periodical or something once a month, you just stake a very small amount. So it's really just the staking amount determines how often you can publish on chain.
And so I guess the staking feature in that regard is something that the users will just to get this right. So
for a user, your relationship is still to the application developer, the application itself. If somebody were to build another Twitter, another social platform on Twitter or on Cortex, the user can have a relationship with the publisher and not have to really deal with any of they would sign their commits, they would sign their information updates, their posts, in this case, their social posts, and send those to a publisher who's, again, like a miner in a proof of stake system. But the relationship between the publisher and the user is up to them. They can define that however they want, aside from the signing.
Okay, but ultimately though the platform has that relationship with Cortex Network where they stake in order to be able to be, I guess, a publisher on top.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. It's definitely an interesting concept to hear about in terms of you can kind of see this whole ecosystem of these Web3 native apps emerging over time where they use this kind of staking mechanic there to, in effect, pay rent to make use of these services.
Yeah, and I think it makes a lot of sense for content as well because I think it's a pretty elegant solution that walks a pretty good line, I think, between freedom of speech in a decentralized environment, but also you have publishers that then ultimately take responsibility for what gets published. So I think it's a good solution for having something that's decentralized. At the end of the day, the user owns the content that they create. They go to the publishers to put that on chain, but at the end of the day, the users own the content. So even if they were deplatformed by the publisher, they wouldn't, same way somebody gets deplatformed by YouTube or something. Right now, they would lose all those videos. Under this, the individual would still own their information, their content that they've created.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's moving forward in terms of what are the kind of the next big features and functionality to come from the Cortex network? I know that it was earlier on this year that it kind of went live with the HMN domain claim, and it was kind of
So we did the HMN domain claim in February, but much like a lot of domains out there, I won't name names, but a lot of Web3 domains. People get them and they're like, what do I do with this? There's not much I can do with this. I can publish, if I get my .eth, I can publish a page and I can share it as my address, and that's kind of cool, but I can't really do much with it. So right now, just a few weeks ago, I mentioned at ETH Barcelona, we launched the actual what you see is what you get interface. And within the next couple of weeks, we'll be tying that to the HMN domain so people can start publishing to their HMN domains. And we'll be releasing as well. Right now, the HMN domains we've given away for free are based on your Twitter name. So essentially, you send a tweet mentioning at HMN domains and include your public key. And within like 20 minutes, you'll receive that NFT domain based on your Twitter name. And that's just a gate, so people don't try and claim hundreds of thousands of these, but we can give them away free because they're based on Polygon, as you mentioned, and we never got back around to that. But the actual tokens and the staking will happen on Polygon. We should mention everything else pretty much is completely chain independent. Even the domains that we use currently are cross-chain on Polygon and Ethereum, and we've got a few more well-known chains that we'll be announcing soon as well. And the way those domains work is there's like the HMN contract is on Polygon. There's other domains that are on Ethereum, but essentially when you go to look up one of those contracts on one chain, it just reverts to the other. And the HD index is a data structure that's completely chain independent, so it will be relatively easy for us to move publishing if needed onto other chains as well.
And I guess for those listeners who are, say, used to setting up wallets such as ledger devices with seed phrases, that's kind of using is kind of indicative of that same thing in terms of you can have a single seed phrase for a wallet, but then you can use that on multiple different crypto platforms.
Yep. Yeah, similar.
So if we're looking further down the line, those sort of 5-10 year time horizons, where are you kind of envisaging that Cortex will be? And also potentially how Web3 more broadly will be too. So I think this kind of forward-looking side, of course, you spend a lot of time thinking about that, no doubt, but it's fun to get people's perceptions and ideas of where we think we'll be headed.
Well, for Cortex, we're starting with these domains, but our second version is going to be very more of a community collaboration tool. So what I've described so far is really just kind of phase 1 or 2. Phase 3 will be much more of a collaboration tool, so that people can collaborate on different documents or different types of content. But I think the cool thing about this is that when you sign a commit, when you sign some piece of content that you're putting out there, you're putting your name on it, you're attaching your domain to it, attaching your identity to it, and that's literally forever, as long as the chains are out there. And so there's going to be this really amazing traceability of how content gets created and how it gets adapted in a way that I think can reward the creators and the ones that then innovate on top or create new content on content that's already been created. I think you can kind of think of like a GitHub for anything, maybe. GitHub for any kind of a content, and a lot of our infrastructure is based on Git, but in a decentralized way, so that when you go out and you say fork a piece of content or a piece of code, there's a whole history of how that all evolved. So I think for scientific research, I think that's going to be really exciting and interesting to have data sets out there, and see how, I think it's going to really improve the shareability of content, because at the end of the day, with this full history, people can get rewarded for all the things that they contribute. And I think that's just going to open up a whole world of new, interesting use cases and new ways for people to get compensated for the kinds of things that they create. So that's a lot of it for Cortex. I think for the web in general, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but when people ask me what Web3 will look like, imagine the web itself and everything in it as a social network and an economy. And I think you start to kind of get the picture, because if everybody is using what we're building, everything will have an owner and a complete history, everything that's published. And it will have an account tied to it. So there's some social applications that we haven't announced yet, but there's going to be ways that you can then interact with this content and with your friends for anything that's published. So it's, right now you go to a Medium page or something like that, and you see, the comments, but the kind of social and economic integration that happens there is very minimal and very surface. Once you start building an identity and a way to connect people and connect funds and tokens into everything that's created, I think thinking about that is kind of mind-blowing. I don't know exactly where that'll go, but it's going to go in some really cool places.
Absolutely. So just to kind of round things up here, no doubt one of the call to actions for the listeners is to head to hmn.domains to claim their HMN domain. If people want to follow you or reach out to you, are there specific social platforms that you're most active on?
Yeah, I am at Leonard Kish, my full name, on Twitter. And we are at app_Cortex on Twitter as well. And then we are on Discord and on Telegram and on Medium as well. So, but Twitter is the go-to place for us. We have weekly AMAs with some great artists. You had mentioned, who we're looking to work with in that space. There's several now that the pretty high-profile artists, Art Jedi, I mentioned Logic. This week we're actually having somebody from Protocol Labs from IPFS. That's tomorrow now. That's at 5 p.m. Mountain Time or 7 p.m. Eastern Time in the US, 4 p.m. Pacific Time. So that'll be on our Twitter channel, and those conversations have been really, really great the last couple months we've been doing it. So definitely recommend tuning in there. And we'll also be launching a podcast that will probably be called something like the Metaverse IRL, building on that idea that the metaverse is about tying things in an immutable way to the real world. And that'll be more focused on the enterprise use cases. So for Twitter and the creator spaces, that's where we'll be. And for more enterprise use cases, we'll be using the podcast to develop that and those use cases.
Well, Leo, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today, and I look forward to seeing the growth of the Cortex Network and this kind of future of on traceability of publishing on the web coming to fruition in the future.
Thanks, Connor. It's been a pleasure talking. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Cheers.
Cheers.
Hi, it's Conor Svensson here again. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I'm really excited to share with you that I've written a book, The Blockchain Innovator's Handbook, a leader's guide to understanding, adopting and succeeding with this disruptive technology. I've been wanting to share my learnings about blockchain and Web3 for a number of years with a wider audience, and I'm really excited that I can do this now. This book covers everything from the fundamentals of the technology through to opportunity identification and implementation for your business to ensure that you can be one of the big beneficiaries of the wider transition to Web3 that's taking place now. The book is available in physical as well as digital form. For more information, head to web3labs.com/innovators.